Okay, the next video in our series is to take a look at the financial payback associated with this solar project. And so we're going to take a look today at that aspect of the project and determine whether or not, and how do we analyze. The real question is, how do we analyze whether or not your solar project ideas are viable or not. We're going to take a look at three basic return methods. So the first one is the most sophisticated. It's the return on investment, and it's essentially an equivalent to something like you would use to compare other investments like stocks and bonds and interest rate in your bank account. What's the effective interest rate of this investment over time? The second one is net present value. And so if you said, hey, at an interest rate of 6%, if I invest this much money, how much net present value, what's it worth today if I discount the future cash flows by the interest rate back to today's money? So what's it worth? What's this project worth in today's money? It's very common. The third one is very simple. It ignores the time value of money and just looks at the payback. So if I spent this much, how many years till I get that money back? So we'll take a look at all three of those. So first, what's the cost of the system? And so the cost, there's a number of things that you need, and we're going to take a look here at the major costs that are associated, and then we'll look at what my costs were for this particular system. So first off, we have our solar panels, and then cost per watt is very important there. Second, we have the inverter, and as we talked about in the third video, selecting the inverter type is particularly important, and it has a big impact on your cost. The third thing is really critical, is where are you planning to mount it, and then what does that particular mounting system cost, whether or not you buy the materials and do it yourself or whether you purchase the kits. Next is wires, and you need to think about the wires, particularly if your panels are a long distance away from your inverter. Then the wires can actually start to add up to be a kind of a significant part of the project. And then in this case, one of my systems are on trackers, and so trackers follow the sun, and they have automation, they have controls, they have a bunch of extra wires, they have sensors, small computers, bearings, so trackers start to add up. And in this case, what you won't see on these cost estimates are labor, because I've done the work myself, so there's really no labor. We'll take a look at the costs of the two systems that I have. So I did phase one, and then I've done phase two. So phase one here, I spent $3,800 for the panels, and then the optimizers and the inverter was another about $3,000, and then the mounting systems was kind of $2,300, and then there's some odds and ends. And in 2017, I got the tax credit of $3,157. So the total investment is $7,365. For phase two, some of those prices had changed, and so the panels were actually a little bit less money. The inverter was less money. The optimizers were quite a bit less money. The wires and the trackers kind of made the whole system more expensive, so that it ended up being, after the tax credit, it ended up being $8,600, so about $1,300 more. And the logic behind this is that the trackers give you 30% more energy, so you'll make more energy over the long term, and it will pay for that additional $1,300 worth of investment. Now, why were the trackers so expensive? And here's a rundown of the tracker costs. Cement was $620. The 4 poles coming out of the ground that you see in all the videos was $100 each. The actuators are $1,600. So the actuators are really the big expense here. And a lot of the design work was trying to minimize the number of actuators that I needed. That really drove a lot of the decisions, was to try to keep the cost of these trackers and the number of trackers down to a minimum. So there you go, there's the costs. If we go back And now we talk about the revenue. So how much money are you going to make? And this really depends on your utility. So many utilities will offer what's called a net zero contract. And net zero means I give you a kilowatt, you give me a kilowatt, the net is zero. And then they just charge you for the net number of kilowatts at retail. So you're essentially getting, for every kilowatt hour that you give to the power company, they're essentially discounting your bill, the full retail price of that kilowatt hour. So that's a really good deal. I don't get that deal. Here I'm calling it market price. I pay retail for the kilowatts that I buy from the utility company, just like everybody else. And then I sell at wholesale, just like everybody else. So it's fair. It doesn't subsidize solar, but at least it tolerates solar and allows me to function. The meters in my area were already allowing to go both ways, so they already allow generation credit and so forth. And then there's some areas where there's restrictions and you can't do stuff. You can't feed back to the grid. So you really need to check with your utility to figure out where you are, and obviously that'll have a big impact. So how much power do you generate? Video 2, we went into the explanation and talked about the basic science of how much energy the solar panel will produce wherever the sun is in the sky. And then we also simplified that to an understanding of a single number, which is kind of the total light hours per day, which may not have much meaning other than it's a really simple equation to multiply that light hours per day times the solar panel's capability in order to figure out how many kilowatt hours you're going to get from each solar panel. And of course you can take your total system capacity and multiply that as well. And then if you have trackers, you can add 30%. So those are some basic things that help you to plan out your system and determine whether or not your cost and your benefit are in line. Okay? The other thing that you really need to be careful of is that shading. So if you take that total amount of light and you count on getting all of it, that's probably not realistic with trees and buildings and so forth. So you kind of need to take some kind of an estimate for how much shading compromise you've made based on the location of your panels. So with those understandings, we can go take a look at some of the estimates that I've drawn up. And so we've got the retail price of the electricity and the wholesale price of the electricity. I have the system size. And then down here in the first column, we have that number, which is how many average of kind of full light hours do you get each day in each month. And then you multiply that times the number of days, and for each panel, you should be able to generate 93 times its capability in January and 165 times its capability in the month of June. You need to discount that for shading, and shading does change over the course of the year. As the sun gets lower, you have a lot more shading, but I've just made it simple here to kind of keep it simple. Then another number that also changes as you go through the year is how much of that power, given the relationship that I have with my power company, power is worth more if I generate it and use it, and it's worth less if I generate it and sell it. So this number is necessary in my formula in order to understand how much the power is worth on average. So multiply the light per month times the size of the system, and you get that value with the 54% usage, which does change every month. But in this, I've simplified it. Then you get this cost of electricity, and then you can convert your kilowatt hours into revenue. So I'm saying that you get $1,293 in kind of a typical system with fixed panels. The fact that some of my panels move, I've taken that and I would generate additional light hours, additional kilowatt hours with the trackers, and then this becomes my revenue, and then this becomes my value. So this is a basic thing, and if you're going through this exercise with your own system, I think that this provides a good template, but you're going to want you're going to want to take month-to-month variation into account. You're going to want to think through some of these things in order to determine what you think your revenue might be. So if we scroll down to this point, you'll see the values that I've got entered here. So this was the cost of the system. And then if I first enter 1293 here, the number from above with fixed panels, then this system would have a 6% return on investment. And the net present value would actually be slightly negative at 6%, $15. But if I move this to say at 5%, then the net present value would go up. So it's a very sensitive number. And then the payback is 12.4 years. So it takes 12.4 years of this revenue in order to pay back the money that you borrowed. And that, that's kind of a modest investment. Now, if we change that number and put the 1487 in there, 1487, obviously more revenue is going to improve the performance. So now the return on investment is 7.4%, and that's, you're in good stock territory. You're in good stock territory. So that's a good investment. The net present value, if you analyze it at 6%, it'd be a $2,000 value project to you. And then the payback period shrinks down to just under 11 years. So that's good performance for an investment. It's not over the moon, but it's a good performance for an investment. And finally, I've had this system installed for a couple of years now. The first part and then the phase 2, we're kind of wrapping out the first year with it. And so where are we? How are we doing? So let's take a look at the values that I've generated with my system. So if we go here to this table, these are all the actual values from 2017 on. And in the first 3 columns here, you can see the amount of power that I generated, which comes from the inverter, and then the amount of power that I purchased, which is on my electric bill, and the amount of power that I sold, which is on my electric bill. And so for each month, I can manipulate those 3 numbers to figure out how much solar I consumed and how much electricity I consumed. And so if we look at 2020, you can see that I've consumed a lot more electricity than I did in the years gone by, and that's because we were working from home instead of leaving every day and turning the heat down. So that's made a difference, and it will affect things, and there you go. And so then I get the effective price, and that changes with the percent used. So these 2 columns, I guess, complement each other, and you can see that this number is kind of up and down. It's up in the winter it tends to be kind of high because they're hardly generating any electricity, but this year I generated a lot more electricity in the winter, and so the percent usage goes down because I'm using less electricity and starting to use gas to heat the house. So there's a variety of dynamics that are going on, and so it's a little bit difficult to nail down. What I did for the analysis above is just kind of take an average of all of this and keep it simple. But there are seasonal trends, and you may choose to model that out. So in the first year, I recovered about $450, and in the second year, I recovered about $450. And then in this third year, and if I'll go here from December to November, I recovered $1,100. But in December, January, and February, the new panels weren't on board at all. And so this number's down probably $150 from what it would be. And then the tracking isn't fully up to speed yet, and so again, I think that I'll be able to improve performance in most of these months as I get the full system completed. So I feel like I'm probably on my way to achieving this 1487 value. I'm certainly within sight of this 1293 value. So right now, it looks like what I have, if I don't do any more work, then I have a modest investment. And if I finish the rest of that work and get some things done, then I have a good investment. And that makes this project worth doing. Thank you very much.